having some incredible discussions as we try to wrestle with the realities of the pandemic, not only health-wise, but also economic-wise, what it's done to our economy as well as our populace. It's hard to weigh out which one's worse. But I think as we start to open up, we really want to understand what does the future look like in terms of the economy? What is it? What's the bounce back? When are we going to get back to normal? What are the implications to our state budget? All those questions, CFO Jim Patronis is here to answer. And, you know, we're really very lucky to have him. As usual, we really leave time at the end for your questions. So I want to just remind everyone that we have the chat function there for you all to communicate with each other, because the chamber is about networking and connecting with one another. But we want you to use the Q&A section to write your questions. You are going to have some time after the CFO's presentation to be able to ask pointed questions. So please write them in there, because only questions in the Q&A section are going to be floated up to Mr. Patronis. So with that, I want to introduce our speaker now. He has had a long career in public service. He's a native Floridian, was born in the Panhandle, and was also, one of my daughters went to his alma mater, Florida State University, where he got his degree in political science. We're happy to have a Noel. I know our Gators are grinding their teeth, but we're going to get back to football soon, and we'll lay it out on the gridiron then, guys. But he's also been a partner. He's been a partner in a family-owned seafood restaurant called Captain Anderson that's celebrated its 53rd anniversary. So not only does he know political science, not only does he know the economy, but like all of us, he has been in the throes of running a business from the ground up. As CFO, he oversees the state's accounting and auditing functions and unclaimed property. He monitors the investment of state funds and oversees the consumer insurance services and fraud. He's the one who ensures that the businesses have workers' compensation coverage in place for employees, and helping injured workers with benefit payments and reemployment. I know he's going to touch on some of the insurance issues as well, but without further ado, I want to welcome our very good friend, CFO Jim Patronis.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Alfred. It's great to join y'all. Jose, Spencer, thank you for putting all this together. Also, quietly in the background is Amanda Pinto. Amanda is our program manager for South Florida. She's an amazing resource. I encourage everybody, if you haven't got a chance to meet Amanda, reach out to her. She might be a little quiet right now because she's a little under the weather. She had to have a little surgery, but she'll be back up and running here soon. And but I'm a big fan of hers, and like I said, just use her as a resource as you're trying to navigate some of the challenges that life throws your way. Great to be with you. It's been an amazing, complicated year in the state of Florida. I'd still rather be in Florida than anywhere else in the United States, as we're looking at this state in the last 120 days has dealt with some pretty amazing obstacles to deal with. Pandemic, financial crisis, civil unrest. You throw a heaping helping of the election cycle on top of it. It makes for a complex road to navigate. But in saying that, the state of Florida's finances are better off than any other state in the union, in my opinion. And because of that, we are going to be situated to bounce back quicker than other states will. If we look at the budget that Governor DeSantis just had to deal with, it started off as a $93 billion budget that the legislature passed pre-COVID, okay? He then finally gets the budget on his desk, and he is now going to treat it like a post-COVID budget. So he vetoes $1 billion, the largest amount of money in the history of state that's ever been vetoed by a governor. And then on top of that, with that veto, he thought outside of the box. So there's about $4.9 billion worth of CARES Act dollars that came down from the federal government. That $4.9 billion has restricted uses to it. But here's an example. There was out of that $1 billion that the governor vetoed, there was monies that were set aside for affordable housing. over $200 million. Well, then we just shifted and we used CARES Act dollars where they were eligibly programmed in order to be used for the exact same service to the citizens of the state of Florida. In addition, the state has paid out, we've been number 2 in the nation in being the number of recipients of PPP loans. We've also paid out $8.5 billion in unemployment benefits. So you flow all that money back into the state with employers trying to continue to maintain their small businesses and keeping their employees on the payroll. At the same time, the state is paying out unemployment benefits. All that ultimately helps keep those households afloat, but also keeps the state of Florida afloat. 75+% of our state's revenues come from sales tax. So the revenues that can be back spent in keeping those households, those small businesses alive, also keeps the state of Florida moving forward as we weather the storm that we're in. But in that unemployment benefit, here's an example. So we have been advocating $8 billion being paid out. Well, about $2 billion of that $8 billion is money that's from the state of Florida's trust fund. It is funded by small businesses. So what we've been advocating for is that $2 billion got to be replenished. If it's going to be replenished, let us use those CARES Act dollars to do exactly that. Our advocacy, along with advocacy of other states, we were able to convince the Secretary of the Treasury to see it that way and gave us the ability to use CARES Act dollars to replenish those dollars the state of Florida spent, as opposed to, because it has to be replenished, going back to the small businesses as a rate hike on their unemployment costs. So challenging times. We will endure this, and the difficult decisions that Governor DeSantis has made right now, the difficult decisions that our local governments haven't been made, they're not fun to make. They're extraordinarily challenging to make. And as we're enduring this environment that we're in, here's the bright side of it. If we can make a bright side of it, is you look at other states. In the case of California was expected to have about a $6 billion budget surplus this year. They've got a $56 billion shortfall instead. New York has got almost $60 billion in shortfalls to their budget. So in the case of the state of Florida this year, we were short just over $2 billion, but we had $2 billion in unspent money, basically money in our savings account. So that was, thank goodness that we didn't spend it. The previous legislature didn't do it. Jose Oliva in your backyard showed a lot of leadership by setting aside dollars. So that's $2 billion that ended up filling the gaps for the shortcomings of lost revenues in the state. In addition to that $2 billion, we've got a couple other pots of money that can come into play if we needed it. So far, we're in a good position right now, but we got what's called the Budget Stabilization Fund. That's about another $1.4 billion that is there in case the budget needs to be stabilized. And as you see those challenges, Florida is in a better position than so many other states in the union. I was reading the Wall Street Journal this morning, and there's cuts all over the nation taking place. Even Boise State, Florida State's going to play Boise State later this year. They eliminated their baseball program and their, I think, women's softball. That's about saving the $3 million to the state, to the state of their budget at Boise State University. These are some of the decisions that institutions of higher ed, governments, and businesses are having to make all over the United States. And we will recover. We will survive. What Florida's got, I'll give you a couple other pluses that we've got. So we've got the Florida Catastrophic Fund. This is a pot of money that we've got. It's kind of like a state reinsurance fund for disasters. $12 billion in cash in it. In addition, there's additional bonding capacity in it. I mean, there's no states in the union that have $12 billion sitting on the sidelines just to deal with catastrophic disasters that could come from a hurricane. So all this being said is stability to our state's economy. It's a stability to financial markets. I got to give a lot of credit to Governor Scott and also what Governor DeSantis has continued on is paying down state debt, trying to be as best we can in managing our growth. and spending. So in Tallahassee, the decisions that are made there make sense for all of Miami-Dade County and your Chamber of Commerce, all its members, and all the incredible small business we have in the state. Some of the challenges that at least come to face us in the state. This is why you got to be so active. This is why, Alfred and Jose and Spencer, and all of you, engage Tallahassee. You can't engage us enough. You've got to hold us accountable because when a challenge faces the state of Florida, that Tallahassee has to come up with a solution. And we're not really one state. We're about 3 different states because, Miami-Dade County is so diverse and dynamic and exciting and got so much going on in one county, more so than some states have, or a combination of states have. So then when you pass legislation down to Tallahassee, that legislation inoculates the whole entire state. So we've got to be sensitive to, what's necessarily good for Miami-Dade County may not necessarily be in best interest of Alachua County or Holmes County. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a challenge, but as you're engaging, as you hold your legislators, you got an amazing group of legislators that come up every year to Tallahassee from your county. Hold them accountable. You've got a day delegation that is active and staying on mission, but it's important because the government that you engage and you keep involved with your development of your business is the government that's being responsive to you. And that means holding people just like myself accountable. But as Governor DeSantis had some challenges, like I said, historic level of vetoes, those decisions that we make now are going to make it that much easier to recover when it comes time as we make the necessary adjustments based on what COVID ultimately does. As I was talking with Alfred earlier, I go to bed every night, and I'm hoping to wake up and turn on the TV and hear that there's a vaccine for COVID. And as something even as simple as news like that breaks, it will change the dynamics of everything. A big concern that I've got also is dealing with business liability, as we're faced right now with businesses trying to reopen. They're doing everything they can to be accommodating and focused on getting consumer confidence in place. Dealerships are selling cars contactless. The pizza I had delivered last night to my house was contactless. Businesses are doing what they need to do to earn that consumer confidence, and as they're just doing everything they can to be that sensitive to their employees and their consumers, they shouldn't have to fear that they're going to be sued by some body or some group because they were doing everything they could to follow CDC guidelines or Department of Health guidelines, and there was some type of a rare occurrence where they think they could track down COVID. So we're advocating for legislation this coming legislative session to hopefully give businesses peace of mind that as they move forward, they can operate, they can employ their people, they can do what's right by their customers without the fear of retaliation by a frivolous lawsuit. Anyway, I'm going to sit back and let some questions come out and look forward to joining y'all. This is the new norm. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Mr. CFO, I know everybody around the state has been talking about the PPP, the Payment Protection Plan, but there's a more important triple letter word that I think is incredibly important, especially for us in South Florida, which is a triple F, the Fraud-Free Florida. I know that that's a program that you have constantly in mind. And so I wanted to see, are there any trends that the small, medium, and even large businesses should be monitoring in regards to the possible fraud, the people taking advantage of the situation and the desperate need that many Floridian businesses have?
Well, Jose, thank you for that. And yes, look, we're spending more screen time ever in our lives looking at our devices. If I were to step away from the camera, which I'm not going to do, you'll see I'm wearing a suit top and I'm wearing shorts. Okay. Earlier today, Brooks Brothers has filed for bankruptcy reorganization because people aren't buying suits the way they were. There's a change right now that we have seen. You know what fraudsters have to adapt to? Fraudsters, this is their business model. How can they make money off the challenging times that we're in? And they're going to. So just earlier today, we sent out a press release where Google and Android have come out. There's been 10 apps that have been identified by their developers that are doing nothing but stealing your data, stealing your personal information, and taking advantage of you. What we advocated for a couple years ago and successfully passed you can reach out to your credit bureau, and with no charge to you, you can freeze your credit. You can also force those credit bureau agencies, whenever somebody's trying to access your credit, that you have to be contacted ahead of time in order to release that information. Again, some people in the credit acquisition business, legitimate businesses, this is a frustration from them. You want to open up a new credit card, that means I don't have to go and have an extra conversation with the actually card holder in order to extend that credit. Well, the times that we're in right now, there's unfortunate that people are being taken advantage of. So again, free services that are being offered by your credit bureaus, freezing your credit, and always, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. In the environment that we're in right now, there was definitely resistance to allow strangers who we did not know to come inspect our homes, to make the rounds anywhere for a home inspection or any type of expanded service, cleaning air conditioned ducts, any of that stuff. So again, you know, there's been a setback to a lot of business as usual as we've been used to. All I would recommend is still work with who you trust, work with recommendations from your chamber. Your chamber is going to have a list of trusted businesses that is part of their membership base, that at least there's a reference point that, you know, these individuals are of good standing to the point that they're actually maintaining a chamber membership. That's always a pretty good place as a sounding board to verify who you're doing business with is authentic.
You know, Mr. Patronis, we've got our Florida Chamber of Commerce has been working. Obviously, you're mentioning fraud, and you know, it makes me think of how litigious our state is, and you know, there are issues with that. How have you been working, and what do you think still needs to be done in the whole controlling and you know, pushing back of the litigation that really puts so much downward pressure on some of our businesses?
Well, you've got to hold your legislators accountable. We're going to be advocating this year. I've spoken to a number of House members and senators that have been interested in approaching this particular subject matter. And look, the last legislative session wasn't a particularly urgent call to action of dealing with COVID-19 liability. I mean, the session was early this year, so session ended early. And since it ended early, COVID wasn't the threat that it is now. So now you've got small businesses that are very much concerned about what their liabilities can be. They follow CDC guidelines. They follow Department of Health guidelines, OSHA, everybody else. They're going above and beyond. You know, retailers are not letting customers in their door without wearing a mask. So what are retailers doing? They're stationing one of their employees up front at the entrance and passing out masks to their customers. They're doing everything they can to protect their employees and the consumers. And oh, by the way, the consumer doesn't have to step foot in the building if they don't want to. You know, there's been a growth on online businesses. So anyway, in saying all of that, if you're going above and beyond, you know, the efforts to ensure that consumer confidence, you know, you would hope that there's, you know, some understanding that if something terrible happens, because we are in a disaster, that you're not going to be subject to some type of lawsuit or litigation. So anyway, this is why we're advocating for it. And I've told people, I said, look, I'm not opposed to whatever we push forward as business protection. Say, you know, it sunsets after 3 years. You know, I would think, you know, after 1 year or 2 years, once a vaccine and some other solutions are in place of dealing with the new world of COVID or whatever the next COVID is going to be, that businesses are able to adapt and still keep people employed, still allow people to live the American dream, invest in their companies, and then allowing them to invest in their people.
Yeah. Well, look, you're a restaurant owner, and you know, the restaurants, like all the tourism industry, are especially hit hard. You know, I don't know if you've been following the news in Miami, but you know, obviously, you know, that we're almost the epicenter of the Florida center of the country. But you know, the mayor has had to seriously consider rolling back some of the openings, and as a matter of fact he closed restaurants from being able to serve indoors. He let outdoor open, and of course takeout and carry-away is still open, but these rollbacks are hurting business. They're hurting consumer confidence. And you know, I'd love to get your take on, you know, what's the downward or down the line impact of all this. You talked about consumer confidence. With this open and close, is that what the new normal is, or we're going to be used to it, or what's the answer here? What's the
painful decisions that are being made? Look, I grew up, I was in the restaurant business for 30 years and was active in the restaurant up until I got this job. There's no two ways about it. I don't envy the decisions that local leadership has had to make on this. But you know, my family's restaurant, we're operating 50% capacity. I've got every other table is being utilized. Where, you know, no condiments on any of the tables. You know, there's alcohol, sanitizer everywhere. I've never seen so much of it. It's just everywhere you turn. So, I mean, we're making these, you know, commitments in order to give consumer confidence and take care of our employees. At the same time, I've also been out to eat in restaurants in this market where every single seat in the entire restaurant is being utilized. So you got some bad actors out there that flare it up. And when bad actors are seen at exploiting what is a local ordinance that should be to be in the best interest of public health, you know, other businesses as well, if ABC can do it, then you know, EFG can do it too. So I mean, the problems that happen out there, unfortunately, then trigger these reactions by local government that, you know, can be punitive. But as you've seen this spike, ultimately it's fearful because you still got to manage the hospital bed counts and their availability to handle those counts. And all you got to do is you look at what happened in New York. It was not pleasant. I think there was probably a little extraordinarily, there were some extremes that happened in New York. I think some of those extremes were also in order to try to get the type of level of attention they felt like they needed in order to mount the response with the COVID situation they were dealing with. You know, New York is just as much of a gateway to the world as Miami is. And to see the challenges the state has faced, I was in Orange County week before last, and I stayed on I-Drive, you know, more hotel rooms in Orlando than there. I mean, it's Orlando, Las Vegas, back and forth. I-Drive was like a zombie apocalypse. There was no restaurants open. There was no hotels open. The convention business is totally devastated there. And you look at those businesses that count on that convention business, and it's no different. I mean, we've got, you know, parking terminals all over the state, which typically are filled with cars that pay $12 a day to board our cruise ships. Well, that's not happening either. So the compounding effect that we've got on our state's economy, you know, and granted, what do we need to do to get consumer confidence? Well, you know what? Wearing masks is not an extraordinary request to ask of our citizens. And in my case, if I can socially distance, then I'm fine. I went walking this morning at the crack of dawn. You know what? There's no need for me to wear a mask with that. But if I'm somewhere else, and especially when I'm around other folks, and it's going to be close proximity, I wear a mask. And I'm not wearing it as much to protect them as I am to protect myself, or myself from them. I'm catching my coughs, I'm catching my sneezes inside my own mask. And at least that way, if I do have something that's wrong with me, I'm not spreading it. At the same time, it's just a simple courtesy that I'm trying to help people get along with.
Yeah, I think
that's a long answer.
No, I mean, it's a good answer. I think, and you're absolutely right. I think the folks, especially the younger folks who are gathering in crowds, et cetera, without masks, you know, they may or may not. I mean, the average age is going down tremendously, but they may or may not be at risk themselves to serious illness. But the problem is that everyone else in the economy is going to continue to lag behind, and it's going to hit their pocket because their job is going to not be there one day, potentially. So, I mean, I think, you know, we've got to have a broader view, and I think you make a great point. You know, related to that, and gentlemen, break in at any time that you want to ask a question, but related to that, you know, we talked about unemployment, the benefits, both statewide and federally. You know, they're going to come to an end at some point. Mm-hmm. Is there any thought at this point to extending the benefit allowance and really how, I mean, not knowing when the vaccine is going to hit, and I'm with you. I every night I go to sleep praying it's going to come in the morning, but not knowing when it's going to be. How long can the state and government keep us afloat as people in the economy?
Sure. So, you know, there's no two ways about it. You know, it was just about 2 weeks ago, you had the Speaker of the House calling the President of the United States morbidly obese. As long as you've got that type of ongoing relationships between those deciding bodies in Washington, we're going to get anything accomplished. Everybody in Washington, they're on break right now. They're going to be back before the end of the month. I think it's starting next week. And there is going to be a real push because, again, California, $54 billion budget shortfall. New York, $60 billion budget shortfall. Those are numbers that they cannot dig themselves out of without some type of assistance. So there's going to be a real argument being made in Washington to get some type of a relief package to those states. Now, those states, some of them have made the necessary changes they need to make. I think Governor DeSantis started off strong by vetoing $1 billion. First time ever in the history of the state of Florida that much has been vetoed. But it's a dialogue. It's a decision that needed to be made. Those decisions that we make now are going to be easier on us as we see how further developments. But to reflect a little bit on our monies, again, we had enough in downturn. We had a downturn of over $2 billion in revenues to the state for the months of March, April, and May. You take those months together, we had enough in reserves to sustain us. Other states don't. They just don't. We've got $4.9 billion in CARES Act dollars, and it's pretty specifically programmed. But you've got certain states out there like Nevada, who they've been hit by a train. Nevada took the CARES Act dollars and they just dumped it in their checking account, and they're operating, out of those dollars. In the eyes of the federal government, that's illegal. So we are going to have more developments, more controversy stemming from this recovery, as states are starting to really feel the pinch of being able to make payroll and continue service. You're going to see in some states layoffs take place. In the state of Florida, we have frozen all new hires. We have frozen all pay increases or changing in job descriptions. We have frozen all travel, and travel's just stopped anyway. But what you are also going to see out of what COVID-19 is, you're going to see a lot of proposed legislation that is going to adopt what COVID has taught us. It has taught us that, it's okay for us to do business via Zoom, just like we're doing today. And we're conducting commerce, we're conducting trade, we're making decisions, and we're all doing it without the need to have to travel. That will be an expense to the state of Florida. Last year, I went to Destin to go speak to the Tennessee Association of Realtors. And I'm thinking, the Tennessee Association of Realtors is coming to Florida for their convention. It'd be sacrilege if the Florida Association of Realtors went anywhere outside the state of Florida to hold their convention. But that's what we are. We're a magnet. Miami's a magnet. Other states want to come to our state to have greater attendance to their events because we are such an attractive place to do business, to visit, because families want to come here. So that's going to affect us. There's no two ways about it.
We're an economy that, where our state coffers are filled through sales tax and tourism and all those things. I think it should not go unsaid that you and the governor have done a great job of managing this crisis up to this point. But with all of the downturn, and again, while some of the airlines are flying more people in the middle seats and stuff like that, they're not flying as many planes, and certainly not as many people are coming to Florida. Where is the horizon? How long can we continue without somehow alternatives to filling back those coffers, either by attracting more tourism or, and I'm saying this hypothetically, that perish the thought that we think about really increasing our sales tax. But the reality is, at some point, we've got to do something. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about that. How long can we go, and what are the remedies?
Sure. So there's definitely there's leakage in the system. If I wanted to push every source of available revenue right now that's eligible for the state that we're not considering, one comes to streamlined internet sales tax. One thing you've definitely seen with what's happening with COVID-19 is you've seen a spike. Amazon alone is 38% of all online sales. I think number 2 is Walmart at about 11%. and then it all just drops off dramatically. Home Depot, a couple of those players are there, but you are now going to see more and more commitments to less interfacing directly, maybe in taking advantage of the convenience. With the purchase of what Uber did yesterday, Uber is double downing on the fact that their services of their driver support will do every type of delivery service that any household could ever desire to want to have. So, as you throw that as into the streamlined sales tax concern, you've still got vendors that are outside of the state of Florida that send billions of dollars, maybe millions of dollars of goods into the state of Florida, that citizens of the state of Florida are on the honor system to pay that sales tax. You're supposed to by Florida law, but there's not really a super strong enforcement, and there'll probably be, everything will be put on the table for debate. And as it's all being debated, I don't see necessarily new taxes being created, but I do definitely see where there's taxes that we maybe need to be a little stronger on enforcement, that there's maybe, there are businesses all over the state, small businesses, that they overpay sales tax. There's ones that underpay sales tax. Is there ways we can be a little tighter with that to the revenues of the state? I'm sure there is. So all that'll be debated. At the same time, we're going to be looking at the numbers of the cash flow of the state. The revenue estimating conference, which we have in the state, will be looking every quarter to look at, okay, legislatures debating policy, what do the numbers really look like?
Yeah. Gas tax, the fuel tax basically funds our road constructions and our, obviously people aren't driving, gas prices are down. What's the future there?
So, here's the reality of it is, as other states, like if you're a state that's got a nexus also in dependency on the energy market, Louisiana, Texas, they've been also devastated. It's been like a 3% hit to the GDP of Texas that energy has dropped as much as it has. Millions of fewer miles are being driven right now. And then you go and you add to it, there's, millions of fewer passengers flying. There's millions of less cars being rented. All that directly affects on our consumption of our fuel. Even to the point where actually oil production had a negative cost to it earlier this year. So you throw all that in the mix, and as the question is, if I want to get really philosophical with you, is, do we need to start, addressing a different way of collecting your usage of using your mileage on your cars? The way gas is taxed right now, it can't keep up with the demands on our infrastructure. So do you go with a model where you pay for the miles driven? Then people get concerned, is there going to be some type of a big brother watching where my car is going at all times? So at some point that dialogue is going to take place. Again, I'm just really very glad to be in Florida and not in New Jersey, or California, or New York, to have those debates and discussions, because at least we have been a much better steward of our resources. We don't have the liabilities that other places have.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've shown time and again, through all kinds of crises, we're one of the first states to bounce back from any kind of economic downturn. So I'm very hopeful about that. You mentioned a little bit about fraud. We've got this whole PPP and the early shenanigans going on with companies that, look, maybe they were really eligible, but it's unseemly to have such a large company. Sure. And I'm sure, those are just the ones we know, but I'm sure that there's a lot of fraud. Whenever there's money, people start figuring out how to take it from your hand. So what's the thinking right now in terms of working with the U.S. attorney? What's Florida doing to clamp down on fraud of PPP?
So, what you're going to ultimately have, I think part of the debate later this month in Congress is greater accountability in the PPP loans. Those loans, literally, there's not that much strings attached to them. You made application. If you checked all the boxes, you got your money. So there's going to be a number of people that feel like, well, you know what? Since I'm not personally liable to this thing, then I'm not that concerned about what my payback schedule is going to be. I wouldn't be surprised if Congress doesn't come back and say, okay, banks, you know what, you process this paperwork, you're going to be held responsible. So banks will fight back. Banks will push back, saying that, well, this wasn't the way we were supposed to, this wasn't the way we were selling it. So we don't need that type of pushback on it. Anyway, my boys just got home. So anyway, I think that'll be part of the debate. Businesses that apply for that money, they need to pay it back. You know what? Especially as you've got businesses out there that were eligible for it, that have done good with it, and especially if they survive, they need to pay it back. It's not their money; it's the federal government's money. But again, I think the federal government also, and again, this is one of the comments I made earlier. You throw a helping of the election cycle, and on top of all of this, members of Congress typically, you know, as also members of the Florida legislature, they don't like to provide bad news to anybody. And as they don't provide bad news, people like them. And if they like them, then they usually get reelected. When people come into Captain Harrison's restaurant, eat dinner, I want to make sure they're happy when they walk in the door. I want to make sure they're ecstatic when they walk out. It's about, you know, again, taking care of the customer.
Mr. Patronis, I got a quick question. I know that we're going into the state's reserves to help with some of the very dire needs that we have in the state, but we're currently in a hurricane season. What are we doing in order to support and ensure that the state is going to be able to sustain what could be an active hurricane season? Sure.
So, and Jose, that's what's been great about the state of Florida compared to so many other states. Again, we had $2 billion in unspent money. I'll call them reserves. You know, it was $2 billion that we had last year that we didn't spend, and we took that $2 billion and we kept it in our treasury, and it's also available for the state as in a time of emergency. Well, that's exactly what we're in, an emergency. So when we lost revenues in March, April, May, and June, those unspent dollars from last year. Hang on, guys. I'm sorry. My son just texted me something and I'm lost my screen. All right, I'm back. Anyway, those dollars are what sustained us in the downturn. Other states did not have that comfort. So in addition to that $2 billion, like I said, we got the $1.4 billion budget stabilization fund. That's dollars that are sitting that are very hard to access, but they're there if we need it. In addition, for hurricane concerns, we've got our catastrophic fund at $12+ billion in cash in it, plus the bonding leverage I've got on top of it. So there's no other states. Texas doesn't have $12 billion just sitting around in the cushions of their couch. So, I mean, we've got dollars that we've got set aside. So, you know, if we have a hurricane or multiple hurricanes like we had back in mid 2000s hit the state of Florida, yeah, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot. But thank goodness that we're in a position where we can take a hit like that and recover much easier than other states.
And as it relates to that, I mean, if we have a active hurricane season, we're more than likely to have flood and issues relating to that. We have had discussions about sea level rise, and especially here in South Florida, we have homes that are having difficulties obtaining flood insurance or homeowners insurance because of all the changes that are happening. What is your office doing to invite or help secure insurance for those homeowners, especially in the areas that we are in?
Well, so, I mean, there's a number of things. We've got a robust admitted market, insurance market in the state of Florida. In addition, we've got surplus lines that come into the state of Florida. So we've got different products that come in to try to give the homeowner and the business the peace of mind that they need. But there's no two ways about it. I mean, what is considered expensive to one person, it's also based on their budgets. As we try to keep homeowners insurance affordable in the state, keeping it affordable is also making sure that the carriers continue to do business in this state. Also, it helps, at least in my opinion, citizens insurance is the insurance of last resort. It provides, in my opinion, a good alternative to people when they can find no other insurance in order to service their needs. But at the same time, the more policies that Citizens has on its books is the more liability the state of Florida is going to experience. The more liability the state of Florida is experiencing, the higher our cost of money is, the higher our cost of borrowing is, just the more unattractive it is to do business in the state. So Citizens had 1.1 million policies. Now it's somewhere around 470,000 policies since 2010 to now. So I mean that change and that many fewer policies now being out of Citizens but into the private sector, to me that all helps. And as private sector carriers are fighting over policies, hopefully they can make enough money to expand their businesses and provide adequate coverage. At the same time, we just got to hold them accountable and make sure that when a disaster does happen, they pay the claims based on the contracts they've agreed to.
So thank you.
A couple of things to mention because, small businesses are here in Miami is the spine of the industry down here. We're almost all small businesses. The PPP loans, as you were talking about, has been an important way that we're able to pull back some of those unemployed that you saw the numbers go down over the last month, and that was a big help. I think, fraud aside, there are a lot of businesses who and they're small mom and pop shops, and now they need help with the loan forgiveness part, which is big, right? Because we don't want these big balloon loans to come due at their table and just send them back again. What is the state doing to help those businesses? I know the system has been so inundated and overrun because of the demand. What is the state doing in that regard?
Well, I mean, again, I think we've got a somewhat of a limited role of what we're going to see happen with the feds. What the feds did do is they opened it up that any financial institution could write PPP loans, whether you're a local credit union, state chartered, federal chartered, bank, state chartered, federal chartered. So I mean, we basically opened it up. And as long as those loans are being used in the way they were intended to be used, there's the forgiveness element to it. But look, it is what it is. There's going to be businesses out there that, gosh, did you get your PPP loan? No. Well, what is it all about? So then somebody learns about it. Oh, well, gosh, I need to go apply for it. It's a no-brainer. And then what do? They buy things they're not supposed to be buying with the PPP loan. I've already heard stories of people buying real estate. They've bought other assets because there's this understanding in the back of their head that they're not going to be held liable on this. And, it's just going to happen. You're going to have it's just the rule of numbers. You're going to have a certain amount of the players that are out there that are going to get a PPP loan that are going to abuse it for what it wasn't intended for. There'll be some of that will bubble up to the state. Some of that will be dealt with by the feds. Some of it will be the feds pushing down on those financial institutions to make sure that they do right by the taxpayers of the United States that supported the program. But it's, again, I think it all starts with a vaccine. I hate to say that. So you get, if we can get at least little bit by little bit taken off of our plate. And I don't know if we'll see what light we'll see at the tunnel, but I think, just like the debate we saw in the last 48 hours is what about schools? Are schools going to open back up? Moms and dads are trying to get their lives back together. Small businesses are trying to get their lives back together, knowing that schools are going to be open and my kids can go to school and it's a safe environment for my kids. That's important. That type of just stability back to our great state's workforce is critical for us on the road to recovery. As there's just it's a different time in Florida right now.
Our superintendent was on with us a week or so ago, laying out his plan, which meets the governor's standards, and I think it's a pretty impressive, detailed plan. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but I think everybody is in the same boat. We're really trying to figure out how do we get back to work, and getting daycare and childcare and school back in session is important for us now, but it's also important for our future, right? I mean, we got to be able to educate our upcoming workforce. One of the things I want to mention before, I don't know if you have a question there, Jose, but there are two programs that I want to make sure our audience knows that we've got. One is GMCC Cares for if you are a small business and you need help in the application of those loans. We're there. You got live people helping you even to fill out the paperwork and do the figuring if you need to. We're there, and I put the link on the chat, and then also you may not be aware of this, Mr. Patronis, but we've got our Career Source South Florida, our workforce development organization here, just recently opened up some direct grants to reimburse small businesses up to $10,000 for cost other than payroll, costs related to bringing back their employees or staying open so they didn't have to lay them off. And that layoff aversion grants, they set aside $500,000 for the chamber to give out. So I want to give that to our members as well, just in case. I think the state, I want to reiterate how an incredible job the state and you have done. I think I watch the news and I see how much further along we are than so many other states. It's a complex environment that we're operating in, but boy, it makes me sleep better at night waiting to wake up to the virus, knowing that someone like you is taking care of business. A couple of questions. One I want to say is, what advice would you give lawmakers going into another session or special session, especially as they try to cope with the reality now?
Sure. And Alfred, thank y'all for what y'all are doing independently without, some government entity ordering you to do it. You're doing the right things by your businesses getting back up on their feet. The National Restaurant Association had a basically almost like a grant program where basically you applied food service and restaurant employees could apply to the National Restaurant Association to get, I think it was up to a $500 check. The state association realtors did the same thing. So, if people who are struggling look around based on their profession, there are solutions out there. And just what y'all are doing, that's a great way to say, hey, we're here to help. And all we want you to do is just to get back to normal. But as to lawmakers and what they're going to have to deal with, here's kind of a crazy thing about it. I'm going to show my age. My first legislative session was in 2007. And I endured the last foreclosure bubble burst we had. It affected Miami-Dade County. It affected every part of the state, and the loss in sales tax revenues because of what the construction industry did and the huge double-digit unemployment numbers we had in the state. We made a lot of very difficult decisions in that legislative session, painful decisions as we transitioned out of a devastation to our state's budget and to our state's economy and how we recovered from it. Here's the challenge. There is nobody left in the legislature or in the executive branch of the governor's office or the attorney general or the ag commissioner. They're all term limited out. So, I'm like the one relic that just wants to go back to small business and work in my family's business that continues to be part of just this furniture in Tallahassee that hopefully is being useful. And so, I don't mean to be a worrywart, but to your exact point, I will remind people how bad it was in 2009 and 2010 and the decisions we had to make in Tallahassee. They were painful. We made changes financially. So a snapshot that I give people. So if we go back to 2006, that was the height of the real estate boom. The state had a budget of $70 billion. It was the biggest budget ever in the history of the state at that time. And the state had in reserves $6.5 billion in reserves. Now, compared to this year, we had $2 billion in reserves. Okay. So $6.5 billion in reserves and a $70 billion budget. Also that year, 20,000 building permits were issued. Wow. Fast forward just 3 years later to 2009, the state still had a $70 billion budget. Reserves went from $6.5 billion down to $900 million. Had spent all those reserves to dig ourselves out of that hole. And building permits went from 20,000 building permits down to 2,000 building permits. So it was a terrible, dark point in the state's economy. And, I'm fearful that we're going to see some resemblance of that here in the future. So again, making sure that your legislators are sensitive to this. What we're going to do in Tallahassee, we're going to do everything. Any capital expenses are going to be punted. Where we typically upgrade fleet and state automobiles at 120,000 miles. Well, you know what? We're not going to upgrade them to 160,000 miles. These are just the things that we do in Tallahassee in order to try to make sure that we're not spending more than we've got, living within our means, and not asking the citizens to stay a part to pay more into the system. But all that is a lot easier if you're holding your legislators accountable. Engage them, be part of the solution making process with them, have a seat at the table. You have got a huge pulpit of your own. Make sure they understand the value of running a fiscally responsible state.
Well, those are great parting words as well, Mr. Patronis. Thank you so much for being with us today. You have been a great friend of this chamber, a great friend of our economy, and a great friend of our businesses. And it's really, like I said, it's comforting to know that you're there holding down the fort and doing business on our behalf. I want to recognize, before we sign off, our chair-elect, Rick Beasley. I mentioned CareerSource South Florida. He's the executive director there, and he's joining us as well. And our vice chair of the Government Affairs, Alex Dominguez from AT&T. And always thank you to our chair of Government Affairs, Jose Bermudez, who's always an active member of what we do to try to promote your business in this crazy topsy-turvy world. Well, we've done another week. Thank you all for living Covida Loca with us. We will see you again next week on Chamber Thursday Roundtables. Until then, stay safe and stay well.